From Michael Jackson bathing in Perrier water to a flooring company selling movie-inspired home designs, The Wiz hides bizarre secrets that make its $24 million production even more extraordinary than you'd imagine. Fact 1. Diana Ross's dream hijack. Diana Ross literally dreamed her way into one of the most controversial casting decisions in movie musical history. In 1977, when Motown Productions and Universal Pictures were planning the film adaptation of the hit Broadway musical The Wiz, Berry Gordy had already made up his mind about who should play Dorothy. The role would naturally go to Stephanie Mills, the 20-year-old powerhouse vocalist who had originated the character on Broadway and earned rave reviews for her performance. But Diana Ross had other plans, and they came to her in a dream. According to the Wiz scrapbook by Richard J. Annabelle, Gordy received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. As Gordy later recounted, "I just got awakened by a call from Diana, who wants to play Dorothy in The Wiz. She had a dream that she played the part, and the film was one of the biggest smash hits of all time." The problem was obvious to everyone except Ross herself. At 33 years old, she was more than a decade older than Mills, and far removed from the youthful energy that Dorothy traditionally embodied. Gordy initially declined Ross's request, telling her directly that she was simply too old for the role. The character of Dorothy, whether in the original Wizard of Oz stories or the recent Broadway adaptation, was meant to be a young person discovering herself and the world around her. But Ross refused to take no for an answer. Determined to make her prophetic dream a reality, she went around Gordy entirely and approached Rob Cohen, the executive producer at Universal Pictures. Ross made Cohen an offer he couldn't refuse. She would guarantee the film would get made with proper financing if he cast her as Dorothy. Cohen agreed to the deal, and suddenly Gordy found himself with no choice but to go along with Ross's vision, regardless of his reservations about the age-inappropriate casting that would later become one of the film's most criticized elements. Fact 2. Michael Jackson's Perrier bathing ritual. When 19-year-old Michael Jackson moved to New York City to film The Wiz in 1977, producer Rob Cohen made sure the young star had everything he needed for his first major acting role. Cohen arranged for Jackson and his sister LaToya to live in a luxury Manhattan apartment on the 37th floor of a building on Sutton Place, giving Michael his first taste of independence away from his controlling father Joe Jackson and the rest of the Jackson family. For the most part, Jackson lived what Cohen described as a normal life during the 6-month filming period. He would spend long days on set learning his lines and perfecting his performance as the Scarecrow, then explore New York City's nightlife scene, becoming a regular at the famous Studio 54 disco. But Cohen soon discovered that Jackson had developed one particularly unusual habit that set him apart from any other actor the producer had ever worked with. Jackson had begun taking baths exclusively in Perrier water, not just drinking the expensive French sparkling water, but actually filling his bathtub with bottles and bottles of Perrier for his daily bathing routine. This wasn't a one-time indulgence or a special occasion treat, but a regular practice that Jackson maintained throughout the filming process. The cost of purchasing enough Perrier water to fill a bathtub on a daily basis would have been astronomical, especially in the late 1970s when imported sparkling water was considered a luxury item. Cohen never revealed exactly how he discovered this bizarre bathing ritual or whether he ever asked Jackson to explain his reasoning behind it. The producer simply noted it as one of Jackson's more eccentric behaviors during what was already an unusual period in the young performer's life, as he navigated his first major film role while experiencing freedom from his family's oversight for the very first time. Fact 3. Yellow brick road home design. When The Wiz needed a yellow brick road that could withstand the demands of a major Hollywood production, the filmmakers turned to Congoleum, a well-known flooring company that specialized in creating durable and attractive floor coverings. Working with production designer Tony Walton and set designer Philip Rosenberg, Congoleum developed a special yellow brick road design that could be installed at Astoria Studios in Queens and various filming locations throughout New York City. The company created what was essentially a high-quality vinyl flooring that perfectly mimicked the appearance of individual yellow bricks, while being practical enough for dancers and actors to perform on safely. This wasn't just painted plywood or a temporary stage covering, but a professionally manufactured flooring product that met both the aesthetic needs of the film and the safety requirements of a major motion picture production. What makes this story particularly unusual is what happened after The Wiz was released in October of 1978. Recognizing a unique marketing opportunity, Congolium decided to capitalize on their connection to the film by making the exact same yellow brick road design available to ordinary consumers for their homes. The company added a pattern called Yellow Brick Road to their regular flooring collection, allowing movie fans to install authentic Hollywood magic in their kitchens, bathrooms, or anywhere else they wanted to bring a touch of Oz into their daily lives. This meant that families across America could literally walk on the same design that Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, and the rest of the cast had danced across during filming. The flooring company had essentially transformed a movie prop into a commercial product, creating one of the more unusual examples of film merchandising from the late 1970s. Homeowners could purchase rolls of the yellow brick road flooring from local retailers and have professional installers create their very own path to the Emerald City. Fact 4. World Trade Center wind disaster. Director Sidney Lumet chose the plaza between the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center as the setting for the Emerald City, one of the most visually spectacular sequences in The Wiz. The Austin J. Tobin Plaza, with its vast open space and towering architecture, seemed like the perfect location to represent the magical capital of Oz, complete with hundreds of dancers and elaborate costume changes that would showcase the film's $24 million budget. However, what Lumet and his production team didn't fully anticipate was how the unique design of the World Trade Center created serious challenges for filming. The plaza was notorious for being a wind tunnel, with strong gusts regularly sweeping through the space between the massive towers. This natural phenomenon, caused by the way air currents moved around the buildings, made it extremely difficult to control lighting equipment, costumes, and choreography during the elaborate musical numbers. In his book Making Movies, Lumet candidly admits that the Emerald City sequence had to be cut short because of these wind problems combined with strict scheduling limitations imposed by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which controlled access to the World Trade Center. The production faced additional setbacks when lighting errors occurred during the filming of the red portion of the sequence, creating technical problems that would normally require reshooting scenes to maintain the film's visual quality. Unfortunately for the production, the Port Authority refused to allow the filmmakers additional time to fix these mistakes or complete the sequence as originally planned. This meant that Lumet had to work with whatever footage they had managed to capture, regardless of the technical problems or incomplete coverage of the elaborate dance numbers. The final Emerald City sequence in the film represents a compromised version of what was intended to be one of the movie's most impressive set pieces, forever marked by the practical challenges of filming at one of New York's most iconic locations. Fact 5. The most expensive single scene. The Emerald City sequence in The Wiz holds the distinction of being the most expensive single scene ever filmed at the World Trade Center, requiring a massive logistical operation that pushed the boundaries of what was possible for a movie musical in 1978. The production brought together 385 crew members to coordinate one of the most elaborate dance sequences ever attempted on location, transforming the plaza between the Twin Towers into a glittering fantasy cityscape. One of the most challenging technical aspects of filming this sequence involved solving a problem that most people would never think about: how to ensure that hundreds of dancers could stay synchronized to the music across such a vast space. The plaza at the World Trade Center was so large that sound traveled differently from one end to the other, which meant dancers at the back of the formation would hear the music a split second after those at the front, creating chaos for the choreography. To solve this problem, the production team strategically positioned 22 playback speakers throughout the entire plaza, carefully calculating the placement so that every single dancer would hear the music at exactly the same time. This required sound engineers to account for the acoustic properties of the space, the distance between different groups of performers, and the way sound bounced off the surrounding buildings. The sequence took 4 full nights to complete, and featured nearly 400 dancers performing elaborate routines with multiple costume changes, including the famous moments where the Wiz commands everyone to instantly change their outfits to stay in fashion. The sheer scale of coordinating so many people, along with the complex technical requirements and the expensive equipment needed to capture it all on film, made this single sequence cost more than many entire movies of the era, cementing its place as one of the most ambitious musical numbers ever attempted in cinema. Fact 6. Jimmy Walker's lost Scarecrow role. When director Sidney Lumet was first approached about casting Michael Jackson as the Scarecrow in The Wiz, he had serious doubts about whether the young singer could handle a major acting role in a big-budget Hollywood production. Lumet, who was known for directing serious dramatic films like Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon, had his own ideas about who should play the character, seeking a brain in this urban retelling of The Wizard of Oz. Lumet's first choice for the Scarecrow was Jimmy Walker, the comedian and actor who had become a household name playing J.J. Evans on the hit CBS television sitcom Good Times. Walker was known for his catchphrase, "Die no might," and his energetic, physical comedy style that seemed perfect for the loose-limbed, clumsy character of the Scarecrow. From Lumet's perspective, Walker had proven himself as both a comedian and an actor on one of the most popular shows on television. When producer Rob Cohen suggested Michael Jackson for the role instead, Lumet was openly skeptical about the idea. He told Cohen directly, "Michael Jackson's a Vegas act. The Jackson 5's a Vegas act." This comment revealed Lumet's concerns that Jackson was primarily known as a performer and entertainer, rather than a serious actor who could handle the emotional depth and character development that the role would require. Lumet's resistance wasn't unusual for the time, as many directors were hesitant to cast musicians in dramatic roles, especially young performers who were mainly known for their work in popular music. However, Cohen was determined to convince both Lumet and music producer Quincy Jones that Jackson had the talent and charisma needed for the part. Cohen arranged for Jackson to fly from Los Angeles to New York for a meeting, where the 18-year-old performer eventually won over both skeptics with his natural ability and dedication to the craft of acting. Fact 7. Diana Ross. Nearly blinded, the elaborate lighting effects that made The Wiz such a visually spectacular film came with serious risks that nearly caused permanent damage to the movie's leading lady. According to the unauthorized biography Call Her Miss Ross, Diana Ross was hospitalized during the production and came dangerously close to losing her eyesight due to the intense lighting equipment used throughout the filming process. Movie musicals in the late 1970s required incredibly powerful lighting setups to achieve the bright, colorful look that audiences expected from big-budget productions. The Wiz was particularly demanding in this regard because many of the scenes took place in fantastical settings that needed to appear magical and otherworldly on screen. The Emerald City sequences alone required massive arrays of lights to create the shimmering, jewel-like atmosphere that would make the location feel truly special. The lighting effects that caused Ross's injury were likely part of the complex systems needed to film the movie's numerous musical numbers, which featured elaborate choreography, costume changes, and special effects that all had to be perfectly illuminated for the cameras. The intense brightness required for these scenes meant that actors were often exposed to lighting that was far more powerful than what would be used in typical dramatic films or television productions. The fact that Ross was actually hospitalized suggests that her eye injury was severe enough to require immediate medical attention and professional treatment. The biography indicates that doctors were concerned about potential permanent damage to her vision, which would have been devastating not only for her career as a performer, but also for the completion of The Wiz itself. The incident highlights the physical dangers that actors faced when working with the powerful lighting technology of the era, especially during the long shooting days required for complex musical sequences. Fact 8. The G-rating box office curse. One of the most unexpected factors that contributed to The Wiz bombing at the box office had nothing to do with the performances, direction, or production values, but rather with a single letter that appeared on movie posters and theater marquees across America. The film received a G rating from the Motion Picture Association, which in 1978 was essentially a box office death sentence for any movie hoping to attract mainstream adult audiences. During the 1970s, cultural attitudes toward G-rated films had shifted dramatically from earlier decades, when family-friendly movies were considered perfectly acceptable entertainment for all ages. By the late 70s, moviegoers, especially teenagers and young adults who made up a significant portion of the cinema audience, viewed G-rated films as being designed exclusively for small children. Going to see a G-rated movie was considered what many people described as the epitome of uncool, and hardly anyone over the age of 12 would dare to be seen buying a ticket for such a film. This cultural stigma was particularly damaging for The Wiz because the movie featured popular adult performers like Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, and Richard Pryor, along with sophisticated musical arrangements and themes that were clearly intended for mature audiences. The film dealt with complex issues of self-discovery, urban life, and personal empowerment through an African-American perspective, making it far more sophisticated than typical children's entertainment. The irony of the situation was that The Wiz contained content and themes that would have resonated strongly with the exact demographic that was avoiding it because of its rating. Young adults who would have connected with the film's messages about finding your place in the world and the urban reimagining of classic story elements never gave it a chance because they assumed it was simply another kids' movie that wouldn't offer anything meaningful or entertaining for their age group. Fact 9. Child labor law choreography. A careful viewing of the Munchkinland sequence in The Wiz reveals an unusual pattern that most audiences would never notice without paying close attention to the timing of when different performers appear on screen. Throughout the early part of the scene, when Dorothy first arrives in this urban fantasy version of Munchkinland at the New York State Pavilion, viewers can see various adult performers dressed as Munchkins, but none of the very young child actors who were also cast in these roles make their appearance until the actual musical number begins. This seemingly minor detail in the film's structure actually reflects the complex legal requirements that Hollywood productions must follow when working with child performers. Federal and state labor laws strictly regulate how many hours children under a certain age can work on movie sets, with most jurisdictions limiting young performers to no more than 4 hours of actual work time per day. These restrictions also include mandatory breaks, tutoring time for school-age children, and requirements for on-set supervision that can significantly complicate filming schedules. For a production as elaborate and expensive as The Wiz, every minute of filming time was precious, especially when coordinating large group scenes that involved dozens of performers, complex choreography, and expensive lighting setups. The production team likely made the strategic decision to save the limited working hours of their youngest cast members for the most important and visually spectacular parts of the sequence, rather than using up their time allowance during the slower-paced dialogue and setup portions of the scene. This approach allowed the filmmakers to maximize the impact of having children in the scene while working within the legal constraints that protected young performers from being overworked. The timing also meant that the most energetic and enthusiastic performers would appear during the high-energy musical number, when their presence would have the greatest effect on the audience and contribute most effectively to the overall spectacle of the Munchkinland celebration. Fact 10. Eartha Kitt's Evil Reject. Before Mabel King terrorized audiences as the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wiz, the filmmakers had their sights set on a performer who was already famous for playing one of the most memorable villains in television history. Eartha Kitt, the sultry singer and actress who had captivated audiences as Catwoman in the 1960s Batman television series, was the first choice to play Eveline in the film adaptation of the hit Broadway musical. Kitt would have brought a completely different energy to the role of the sweatshop-running witch who enslaves the citizens of the West. Known for her distinctive purring voice, feline grace, and ability to be both seductive and menacing at the same time, Kitt had already proven she could handle villainous roles with the perfect combination of glamour and genuine threat. Her performance as Catwoman had made her an icon, and her musical background meant she could have handled both the acting and singing demands of Eveline's show-stopping numbers. The casting of Kitt would have created an interesting connection between two very different interpretations of classic American stories, linking the campy world of the 1960s Batman series with the urban soul musical reimagining of The Wizard of Oz. Kitt's natural charisma and stage presence, combined with her experience playing powerful, intimidating characters, seemed like a perfect match for the role of a witch who rules through fear and oppression. However, for reasons that were never publicly explained, Kitt ultimately did not get the part, and the role went to Mabel King instead. King, who had originated the role of Eveline in the original Broadway production of The Wiz, brought her own powerful interpretation to the character, but audiences can only imagine how different the film might have been with Kitt's distinctive style and screen presence commanding the sweatshop scenes and delivering the villain's musical numbers. Fact 11. Fake Harlem geography blunder. One of the most glaring geographical mistakes in The Wiz occurs during a seemingly innocent moment when Dorothy is trying to establish her identity and explain where she comes from in this strange new world she's found herself in. When Miss One, the Good Witch of the North, asks Dorothy for her address, Dorothy confidently responds that she lives at 433 Prospect Place, presenting this information as proof of her residence in Harlem, where the film establishes her character as living with Aunt Em, Uncle Henry. The problem with this address is immediately obvious to anyone familiar with New York City's street layout and neighborhood boundaries. There is no Prospect Place located anywhere in Harlem, the Manhattan neighborhood where Dorothy is supposed to live and work as a kindergarten teacher. Prospect Place is actually a real street, but it's located in Brooklyn, specifically in the Crown Heights and Prospect Heights areas, which are completely separate boroughs from Manhattan and miles away from Harlem. This geographical error becomes even more revealing when you understand how the filmmakers actually shot the movie. The production team filmed many of the Harlem street scenes not in the actual neighborhood of Harlem, but in various Brooklyn locations that could provide the urban backdrop they needed for Dorothy's home environment. The scriptwriters apparently became confused between the fictional setting where Dorothy was supposed to live and the actual filming locations where they were shooting her scenes. The mistake suggests that either the screenwriter Joel Schumacher wasn't familiar enough with New York City geography to catch the error, or that someone involved in the production mixed up the real-world filming locations with the fictional addresses that were supposed to represent Dorothy's Harlem neighborhood. For New York audiences watching the film, this geographical blunder would have been immediately noticeable and potentially distracting from the story's authenticity. Fact 12. Michael Jackson's animal study method. Michael Jackson approached his role as the Scarecrow in The Wiz with the same meticulous attention to detail that would later make him one of the most innovative performers in music history. Despite being only 18 years old and having no formal acting training, Jackson was determined to create a character that would be both believable and visually captivating on screen, which led him to develop an unusual research method that few actors would ever consider. Jackson spent hours studying videotapes of wild animals, specifically focusing on gazelles, cheetahs, and panthers, to understand how these creatures moved with natural grace and fluidity. He was particularly interested in how these animals could appear both vulnerable and powerful at the same time, which seemed perfect for a character like the Scarecrow, who lacks confidence in his own intelligence but possesses an innate wisdom and kindness that helps guide Dorothy on her journey. The choice of these specific animals was not random but reflected Jackson's deep thinking about what the Scarecrow character should represent. Gazelles are known for their elegant, almost dance-like movements and their ability to appear both delicate and strong. Cheetahs move with incredible precision and grace, while panthers have a mysterious, almost magical quality to their movements that could translate well to a fantasy character living in the urban landscape of Oz. Jackson's dedication to this unconventional preparation method paid off in his performance, where viewers can see hints of these animal-inspired movements in the way he carries himself as the Scarecrow. His loose-limbed, graceful style of movement throughout the film reflects the influence of his animal studies, creating a character who moves unlike any other Scarecrow that had been portrayed on stage or screen before. This attention to physical detail would become a hallmark of Jackson's approach to performance throughout his career. Fact 13. The Emerald City Makeup Marathon. The transformation of Michael Jackson into the Scarecrow required one of the most elaborate makeup processes ever designed for a major Hollywood film, involving prosthetic pieces, special adhesives, and intricate detailing that took a grueling 4 hours to complete each day. The makeup was created by Stan Winston, who would later become famous for his work on films like Terminator and Jurassic Park, and it involved applying numerous prosthetic elements to Jackson's face and exposed skin to create the appearance of a character made from burlap and straw. The process began before dawn each filming day, with Jackson arriving at the makeup trailer while it was still dark outside to begin the lengthy transformation. Makeup artists had to carefully apply each prosthetic piece, blend the seams to make them invisible, and then add layers of paint and texture to create the weathered, patchwork appearance that would make Jackson look like he had been sewn together from old fabric and stuffed with straw. The physical discomfort of wearing the makeup was significant, as the prosthetics and adhesives made it difficult for Jackson to move his face naturally or even eat and drink normally during filming breaks. The makeup was also hot and uncomfortable under the bright lights required for filming, and removing it at the end of each day was almost as time-consuming and uncomfortable as putting it on had been. Rather than endure this exhausting process twice in a single day, Jackson sometimes made the unusual decision to sleep in his Scarecrow makeup and return to the set the next morning, still wearing the previous day's prosthetics and paint. This meant he would spend entire evenings looking like the Scarecrow, presumably staying home to avoid being seen in public with his elaborate movie makeup still intact, but it allowed him to skip the morning application process and get a few extra hours of sleep before facing another long day of filming. Fact 14. Quincy Jones's cameo performance. Hidden within one of the most spectacular musical sequences in The Wiz is a brief but historically significant cameo appearance that marked the beginning of one of the most successful collaborations in popular music history. During the gold scene of the elaborate Emerald City sequence, viewers can spot music producer Quincy Jones sitting at a piano, playing along with the orchestral arrangement as hundreds of dancers perform around him in glittering costumes. This cameo appearance was particularly meaningful because it represented the first time that Jones had ever worked professionally with Michael Jackson, despite both men being major figures in the music industry by 1978. Jones had been brought onto The Wiz as the music supervisor, responsible for adapting the Broadway musical's songs for the film and creating new arrangements that would work for the movie's elaborate production numbers. During the filming process, Jones had the opportunity to observe Jackson's work ethic, musical instincts, and natural talent up close, watching him rehearse and perform the demanding scarecrow role day after day. Jones was impressed not only by Jackson's abilities as a performer, but also by his professionalism and dedication to the craft, qualities that would prove essential for the intensive recording sessions that would define their future collaborations. The relationship that began during The Wiz would soon blossom into one of the most productive partnerships in music history. Jones went on to produce 3 of Jackson's most successful solo albums: Off the Wall in 1979, Thriller in 1982, and Bad in 1987. These albums would transform Jackson from a talented young performer into the undisputed king of pop, selling hundreds of millions of copies worldwide and establishing both men as legends in the music industry. The brief piano cameo in The Wiz essentially captured the moment when this historic musical partnership first began. Fact 15. The infamous cardboard pillars. One of the most memorable and frightening sequences in The Wiz takes place in a nightmarish version of the New York subway system, where Dorothy and her companions find themselves trapped as the station literally comes to life around them. The scene features massive concrete pillars that begin to crack and break apart, moving menacingly toward the terrified characters as part of the underground world's attack on these unwelcome visitors from above ground. However, careful viewers who watch this sequence closely will notice a significant production mistake that reveals the limitations of the film's $24 million budget. When the first pillar breaks and begins moving toward Dorothy, the top portion of what is supposed to be a heavy concrete column clearly shows that it's actually made of lightweight cardboard or similar material. The fake pillar top wiggles and wobbles in a way that solid concrete never would, immediately breaking the illusion that these are genuine structural elements of a subway station. This revealing mistake becomes even more noticeable once you know to look for it, because the same problem affects multiple pillars throughout the sequence. The production team apparently used cardboard or foam tops on the pillars to make them safe for the actors and stunt performers who had to work around these moving set pieces, but the lightweight materials moved in ways that made their artificial nature obvious to anyone paying attention. The subway sequence was already technically challenging to film, involving complex choreography, special effects, and the coordination of multiple moving set pieces in a confined space designed to look like an actual New York subway station. The decision to use lightweight materials for safety reasons was probably the right choice for protecting the cast and crew, but it created a visible continuity error that sharp-eyed viewers have been spotting for decades, turning what was meant to be a terrifying moment into an unintentional glimpse behind the scenes of movie magic.